I'm Katie von Holzen, IASCL's media coordinator. I have with me today Dr. Elena Lieven, Emeritus Professor at the University of Manchester. She earned her undergraduate degree and PhD from the University of Cambridge and first arrived at the University of Manchester in 1979, but between 1998 and 2012 was also a senior scientist at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, and director of their Child Study Center in Manchester. Upon returning to Manchester full-time, she was the first director of the ESRC International Centre for Language and Communicative Development, LUCID, across the universities of Manchester, Liverpool, and Lancaster. She continues to be a member of LUCID today. She is best known for her work on usage-based approaches to language acquisition and has made significant contributions to our understanding of the relationship between emerging lexical and grammatical knowledge and the input available to the learner, as well as how this is influenced by the individual characteristics of the learner and shaped by cultural practices. Elena has served as the field as the editor of the Journal of Child Language and as president of IASCL between 2008 and 2011. In 2018, she was elected as a Fellow of the British Academy. Elena, I'm so glad to have you joining me today. Welcome. I'd like to start off at the beginning and ask you how you found your way to study psychology and focus on language development. Did you have other interests? And if so, how did child language research eventually win out?
Well, I was always interested in a huge range of subjects, both scientific and the humanities, and it was difficult to decide where to go. So I went up to Cambridge actually to read physics, and I did physics, chemistry, and math for my first year. But my maths just was not strong enough to do the kind of physics, advanced physics that I wanted to do. So I switched to psychology and history of philosophy of science in my second year. And that was a difficult choice for the third year between the two, because history and philosophy of science is absolutely fascinating. But anyway, I chose psychology. So in my third year, I chose psychology, and it was a very privileged education. There were only about 20 of us doing the course, and we had visitors like Noam Chomsky and B.F. Skinner. And I listened to Chomsky on how children learn language. And basically, I just didn't believe that children only needed to hear a small number of utterances to decide what form of innate grammar was represented by the language they were learning. But I also, in the seminar with Skinner, who argued that it was all reinforcement and linear associations between words, that all seemed too simplistic as well. And then we had two lectures on language acquisition in my final year from Joanna Ryan, who emphasized the sort of Strawsonian nature of pragmatics, and that you couldn't just look at the surface of language, you had to understand what people intended by saying things. And that seemed to be the way to go. So I got a PhD grant and started to do my PhD with her on early language acquisition. And I started by collecting data from three little girls in Cambridge, who all turned out to learn in very, very different ways. So that was what my PhD was about.
Right. Wow. I can't imagine what it was like to be sitting in those lectures with kind of like from the direction from B.F. Skinner, from Noam Chomsky, and then thinking, "Hi, I'm not so sure about that. I so you started your PhD, you earned it in language development is the area, also from Cambridge in 1980. Your dissertation was titled Language Development in Young Children. I love that title. It's so simple.
Yeah, but it was three young children. That was the point.
Yeah. And so I'd like you to maybe put yourself in your shoes, right? As a newly minted person who's earned their PhD, but now transport yourself to the level of understanding that we have today in our field, a bit over 40 years later. Um, what do you think that person that you were back in 1980 would think about our understanding or the state of the field of child language acquisition and learning today?
Well, it still is, and perhaps even increasingly, just an enormously rewarding and interesting field. We're still working the ways in which children build up their language, starting, before birth in the womb, through learning the meaning of words and then registering strings and their internal structure, and working out how to do agreement and long distance dependency. So there's still a huge range of really interesting topics, which have now been added to by, first of all, much greater interest in languages other than English. When I started, there was almost nothing in any language other than English. And English is a very odd language. It has hardly any morphology, and it has this sort of word order syntax, which is, it's not at all usual as a language if you look across them. But we also have so many more tools, large databases, computational methods for examining them, and and I think a much greater grasp of the difference between a formal linguistic description of a language
Mm,
and the actual realities of how people speak and learn. And of course, that is what's crucial for children, how they're actually spoken to, in what kinds of contexts, how they pick up from that. So I would say to a young PhD starter out, well, there's all to play for. I mean, we've come a long way, but there's an awful long way to go still. One of the things I love about child language is this crossover between scientific methods and um, more anthropological
mm,
uh, and humanities. I mean, so we need linguistics, we need anthropology, and we need scientific methodology. And that suits me down to the ground, really.
mm. Um, so I didn't think of asking you about this, but an interest in anthropology would have suited you well while you were at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. This is a wonderful thing about having centers where you bring in diverse researchers to exchange with each other, not just linguists hanging out with linguists or psychologists hanging out with psychologists, but people who have diverse ways of approaching a problem, but are interested in the same problem.
Yeah, I mean, actually, my interest in anthropology started much, much earlier than that. I spent some time in Papua New Guinea
Hmm.
as a grad student trying to look at early language development there, which I did not do very successfully, I have to say. And then recently, I've been involved in a project with Sabina Stoll and Balthazar Wichel in Nepal on the acquisition of Sintang. So I've always really been interested in anthropology. And Cambridge, of course, was an incredible centre for anthropology. I had many, many friends, and I went to all their research seminars, and so I learned a lot from that. The other thing that anthropology has sort of done for me is to say, what are the contexts in which children grow up across the world? Because
Mm.
they're not the same. So, in most of the cultures that I've had anything to do with, the children, little babies, are looked after once they can be carried around by older children. They're really looked after by older children in groups. So that means they're getting a very different kind of input to the input that children in our cultures get. And so it's important to look at the affordances of the interaction for children learning language. And I think anthropology has helped me think about that a lot, as linguistics has helped me think about how different languages are. So it's good to put this stuff together, and you are absolutely right that it's good to look outside your own narrow field of concern, because you can get inputs from which are very enriching from other fields.
Mm. Yeah, so very interesting. So I want to turn back just a little bit to your kind of general approach to your research. So your research has been grounded in and has definitely advanced a usage-based theory of language learning. So I'm curious how your early experiences, either within the field or outside of science, how that was shaped by this path. You mentioned earlier um, early attending seminars of Chomsky and Skinner, and not quite believing that that's how children could learn language. So um, maybe if you could say something about, your early experiences, but also the role that you see input playing in language learning.
Well, I've always loved small children. I'm the eldest of five children, and there's 17 years between me and my
Mm,
youngest sibling. Um, so I think the early years of life, as you see children coming from birth to starting to talk and understand what's going on around them, are just completely fascinating. And really, I started out academically as a developmental psychologist, and one of the things I've constantly tried to work for is to integrate language acquisition, the study of language acquisition, more into the more general study of developmental psychology. No child learns language without either hearing or seeing it. I mean, they just don't. So you've got to study what they're hearing and seeing. The usage-based theory sees children's knowledge of the language system being constructed or emergent, as Brian McQuinney would say.
mhm,
And it's built on their developing cognition, their developing understanding of interaction. With the language that they hear, um, and in the context in which they hear that language. So it's usage based in the sense that it's both what they produce and how that interacts with what they hear.
mhm,
And what they hear is usage based because you're using it in interaction. So there's no need basically for any innate syntactic representations. And that's really where the big difference comes. And so the great thing about usage-based theory is that it has to incorporate a study of context, of input. And the problem with the sort of notion of a pre-given innate syntactic representation is that it just doesn't bother about any of that. And if you don't bother about any of that, you cannot explain how children learn to talk.
I think this also ties back to what we were saying before about kind of the modern state of the field and the kinds of technologies that we have, right? We now can bother with such things as getting a much more comprehensive sense of what the input is. We have tiny recorders that we can, stick onto children. We have algorithms that can, do the job of, um, to a certain extent, transcribing what is heard, and we can get much denser samples and much better understanding than and much more quickly than we used to be able to. And I think that also contributes to, having to deal with this kind of variability, right? It makes it actually possible and impossible to ignore. Yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, one of the things that I'm always very interested in is the way that changes in technology afford new ways of analysis and of looking at things. And, I mean, when I started out, I was on a moped carrying an enormous reel-to-reel UHA recorder, once a week to record these little kids in Cambridge. Now, as you say, you can put a recorder on them. I collected, for me then, a huge amount of data, an hour every 2 or 3 weeks. But what I could get from that compared to what you can get from a dense database is just extraordinary. And so each new technology affords greater possibilities, but one does have to be careful because you need to understand the technology, and
Mm,
no technology is perfect.
mm,
So, a recorder on a child is fine, but you still have to interpret the context in which these utterances are happening.
mm.
And you may have so much data that you don't know what to do with it.
Maybe
Because,
may we all be
well,
so fortunate to have that problem.
yeah, but I mean, if you have hours and hours of Lena data, you can't afford, unless you have millions and millions of money in grants, to get it transcribed. So that means you have to use new techniques to find the segments that might be interesting, say for dense interaction or something. So one has to be quite cautious about these things.
So Shanley Allen, who is the current IASCL president, and Evan Kidd, who you were you his
Evan
PhD?
was my first Max Planck, no, second Max Planck Child Study Centre in Manchester coordinator or lead.
Oh, okay. So he was had already done his PhD and then was
Yeah,
working as a lead coordinator in the
he
oh,
was the postdoc. Yeah, yeah.
okay, okay, very neat. So Shanley and Evan are the editors of TLAR, which stands for Trends in Language Acquisition Research, and they've opened a call for monographs and edited volumes to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the publication of Dan Slobin's seminal cross-linguistic study of language acquisition series. So, you contributed a chapter to the fifth volume of this series titled Cross-Linguistic Study of Language Acquisition, Expanding the Contexts. You were also a co-editor of the 2009 book Cross-Linguistic Approaches to the Psychology of Language, Research in the Tradition of Dan Isaac Slobin, along with Jiansheng Yu, Nancy Budwig, Susan Irvin Tripp, Keiko Nakamura and Seda
Alice,
Oskaliskan.
yeah.
So how did this come to be?
Well, as an undergraduate and graduate student, I was a tremendous admirer of Dan Slobin's work. And actually, I think one could argue he was the inventor of the sort of, or certainly of cross-linguistic studies of acquisition. I mean, the way in which he put together processing issues like recency and primacy effects in what children hear, frequency, and all of those,
Mm,
together with an absolutely detailed study of different languages, was just completely, path-breaking.
mm,
Um, and we met at a child language conference at the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics, the one in Nijmegen,
mm,
in 81. And my PhD was on individual differences between these three little girls that I was talking about.
mhm,
Um, and I suggested to Dan that you could use individual differences between children within a language to inform some of the um, questions that he was asking about by comparing acquisition across languages. And that led to quite a lot of argument and discussion, but also to my writing this chapter that you talked about. But it also meant that I spent quite a lot of time in sabbatical terms and things in Berkeley and got to know Guo and the others. So when it came time to to edit this volume for Dan, that's what we did.
mm. So maybe a little bit of a put your money where your mouth is. Write me up a chapter
Yeah,
and
that's what Dan said. He said, "Well, if you really think that, write me up a chapter, or it's really a monograph because it's so long."
we've been talking about the different kinds of bigger teams that you've been a part of and actually had a foundational role in putting together. So through the Child Study Center at Manchester, which was funded by the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, and through Lucid, the ESRC Center for Language and Communicative Development. So in those, you've played a foundational role in bringing together teams of researchers to study child language all under one roof. I'd like you to maybe say a little bit more about the foundation of Lucid, as well as the integral role that you see in these teams and these kinds of collaborations for furthering child language research.
Well, when I went to Leipzig to join Mike Tomasello in his department, the he agreed to fund a centre for me in Manchester. So I commuted between the two for that entire time. And
Mm,
then when I retired from Leipzig, which I had to do at 65,
mhm,
um, I came back to Manchester and we applied to the SRC for a 5-year grant, and that was what founded Lucid. And the Lucid directors were a group who had been working together over many years: Julian Pine, Caroline Rowland, Anna Thixton, and Patrick Monaghan. We'd founded a Chester reading group years before. Uh, Julian, Caroline, and Anna had actually been PhD students of mine. We were all been working together for years and years and years. And although I was the nominal lead of Lucid, Each of these people made an absolutely seminal contribution.
Mm,
They all had different but very important inputs. And for me, working in teams is just essential to the scientific endeavor. People bring different skills and perspectives. If you've got a team of senior staff, postdocs, postgraduate, undergraduate, postgraduate, sorry, um, they're all well equipped to learn from each other. So the more senior people can sit on their knowledge and expertise and hand it over. But the younger colleagues usually are much more up with kind of new techniques, new methods, and challenging ideas. So it's a huge interchange of ideas. And for me, it's just, I've been incredibly lucky to work with people who actually appreciate each other's contributions. So there hasn't been, horrible competition. There's been huge collaboration. And I really enjoy it, the friendship, the creativity that comes from working collaboratively in a team. You get so much further,
mm,
at least in any kind of scientific enterprise, I think. And it was the same in Leipzig, I mean, slightly smaller group, but the same.
mm. I always refer to this as having somebody to play with on the playground. It's much more fun to be on the playground with somebody else than doing it all by yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's being in academia is not easy for people. I think it's even more difficult now for young people. So to be part of a team that can help bring you along, but can also give you that kind of support and friendship is, I think I mean, it's really valuable for me, but I think for young people, it's extremely valuable, and everybody should try and get into a team.
I think that's great advice. You, as well as Dr. Fred Genesee, both received IASCL's 2024 Roger Brown Award, which was established in 2011 to honor Dr. Roger Brown, who many acknowledge as the father of modern day research on child language. This is a highly prestigious award and conferred every 3 years to outstanding researchers and leaders in the field of child language. So, congratulations on receiving this award. I think well deserved. And so I would like to ask you what it means to you to receive it.
Well, first of all, it was actually this award was established when I was president of IASCL.
Mm,
And so it was particularly moving for me and surprising actually, to be nominated for it and to get it. I was really moved. And secondly, I think it shows that the field of child language has moved on to some extent between the theoretical divide that used to
mm,
characterize it. There's okay, people still have the hold to their theoretical frameworks, some a lot more determinedly than others, but methods and results can cut across this, I think, in a way that there was hardly any dialogue
mm,
in the olden days. And thirdly, I see it not so much as a tribute to me, to be honest, as I think Fred Genesee also said, but to these remarkable people, old and young, that I've been working with over the years. It's a tribute to what we've managed to achieve together, and so I was, yeah, very, very happy to receive it.
I find it interesting that it's now come full circle. So during your presidency, initiating the Roger Brown Award, I'm going to talk or ask you in a moment about a different award that we've started with the IASCL, the Early Career Award. So during my tenure as media coordinator, I've seen kind of how that was developed and then awarded at the last Congress. So I'm curious what process kind of went into deciding to create the Roger Brown Award.
Well, I knew you'd ask me that, and the trouble is I can't really remember because it's a long time ago.
Okay.
I certainly wouldn't claim that it was necessarily my idea. It
Okay.
came from someone, I'm not sure who, but I certainly embraced it with enthusiasm. And I was delighted to name it as the Roger Brown Award because I met Roger Brown. He came to
Mm,
the unit I was a PhD student in, and I always admired his work enormously. He was also Dan Slobin's supervisor, so there's a nice long thread here. And we awarded it to Brian McQuinney, I
mm,
think. obvious recipient for the first Roger Brown Award. So I really can't remember how it all started, but it certainly we put it together under, and I think I seem to remember that we decided we should have a separate group of the IASCL board, three people who from different parts of the field who would actually work on nominations and
Mm.
on recommendations. And I think the president is on that, but actually I can't even remember that. But anyway, it's a really good idea. And as for the award that went to Rowena Garcia this year, I mean, I just think that's a marvelous development. We need to bring on young people. In fact, I would be delighted if we managed to afford to do more than one. But I mean, she was obviously a tremendously uh, a wonderful choice, and she gave a fabulous talk. But early career researchers are becoming more and more, I think that so the support for early career researchers is becoming more and more important. I mean, you probably don't know, but the British Academy has just started a two early career researcher, three now, I think, networks in the UK. And that's on the model of the Young Academy in Germany.
Ah,
So the idea that you bring people, young people together and give them some support and some help. And I think it's great that IASCL has done this. It's a really good idea. So you've got one for the old and one for the young.
yeah. So you were referring to Rowena Garcia, or Dr. Rowena Garcia, who won the inaugural Early Career Award, which was established in the last round, in the last Congress round, to honor more junior researchers. And you're right, we had kind of the honoring of the established senior researchers, and now also making sure that we span that um, the entire lifespan of the scientist. And yeah, she gave, I think, a fantastic plenary talk in Prague. It was titled Casting a Wider Linguistic Net, Language Acquisition Insights from an Austronesian Language. And I think she also, if I'm not mistaken, she's also maybe considered a if you consider let's see, is she an academic grandchild of yours at all? Maybe once removed from
Once removed, yes.
yeah.
I mean, I know her, obviously, I've met her. And I mean, the great thing about her work is that it completely fulfills everything I've always wanted, which is to look at languages which are remote from the kind of normal areas of study, to look at children learning them and look at the context in which they learn them. So for me, it was perfect. And I know Rowena, yeah, but I don't think I'm not sure who her PhD supervisor is, but if it's Evan or Caroline, then definitely she's. I don't think it is though. It
Mm-mm, no.
might.
And she'll be working I know I feel strange talking about her, but she's just gotten she's going to be working at the Center for what's called SAS in German, Center for um Language Sciences in Berlin, and I'm really looking forward to see what
That's great.
will
That's
come.
really.
So as long as we're on the topic, I was wondering if you might have any advice for early career members of IASCL, considering the emphasis that we're putting on this now.
Well, yes, I think that basically, I think ECR members should try and come to IASCL. It's the one place every 3 years where you get the entire family of child language researchers across the theoretical divides and across languages. And there is some support available for them to get there.
Mhm,
Um, they so from that would be one thing. I think they should try to present their own research,
mhm,
and if they're I'm delighted to see that more and more, if there's a joint paper with a senior researcher and an ECR, the ECR often gets to present at least part of it, and I think that's important. The other thing about IASCL is it's a very friendly, supportive environment. So, as international conferences go, I would say that it's a good place to be. And finally, I mean, people can contribute to the newsletter with little reports on conferences they've been to or announcements of their PhDs. And that's another way of the IASCL newsletter that Angel Chan, who is definitely one of my academic children,
Yes.
um, edits. I think that's a good way to be part of the whole enterprise. So yeah, I mean, it's very hard starting out in any career, but I think perhaps the career of child language research can be considerably more supportive than some.
Yeah, I always wonder because of the nature of what we study, whether we kind of self-select a little bit, the kinds of people who are interested in this in child
Yes,
language development. Um,
I
yeah,
think there may
and
be.
sorry.
I just said I think there may be something in
Yeah.
that we self-select.
Yeah. So there's always opportunities to contribute to the bulletin edited by Angel. You're absolutely right. We also have a blog that I would love to see more early career researchers contributing to. And you also mentioned the travel bursaries or travel awards. We gave out quite a few for the Congress last year. I think at least a dozen students were able to be supported, and then also researchers not necessarily students from the Global South who were also able to receive financial support. And I think that that's something that's also very important. And it was very interesting to see that process kind of from behind the scenes and the importance that was placed on it by the kind of the officers of IASCL.
Yeah,
Um,
that's IASCL is a very good organization from that point of view.
mm.
Um, Hopefully, it can continue to use such resources as it has to support ECRs.
So IASCL continues to be influential in the field, but it has been influential for a very long time. It actually recently celebrated its 50th anniversary, and to celebrate, we asked members to submit their wishes for the future of child language research. We allowed these to be anonymous, but here I have you in front of me, and so I can ask you. I'm curious, what would your wish be for the future of child language research?
Well, that it continues to be supported,
Mm,
um, that we get further in our scientific understanding of this, what is an amazing human ability, and how it develops. I mean, understanding how children learn language is absolutely fundamental to the scientific study of developmental psychology on the one hand, but also human language is unique. It's
mm,
completely unique. We can argue about animals and what they do and don't do, but the kind of language we have is unique, and therefore it's one of the most interesting things that you can possibly study, in my opinion. So my hope is that we continue to work out exactly how it's done across a wide range of contexts and languages, and also media. I mean, I think sign language is extraordinarily interesting in its potential to contribute to our understanding of acquisition. And obviously, we also do need to work out the relationship between oral language and problems with written or later language development. But there's a lot of people working on that. And I see that as part of IASCL, not just acquisition of oral language, but acquisition of the entire linguistic domain, if you like.
Well, I hope that that wish comes true, or those wishes. Yeah.
Won't be in my lifetime. I suppose my other wish is that we don't go round in circles, that we
Mm,
can to move on. I mean, obviously, science is a spiral. You get people going to one side of total nativism, say, and then to the other side of it's all totally empiricist or in the environment. But and I mean, it will always be like that. But I'd like it to be an upward spiral so that there is progress and I think we've seen that. I really do. Um, so yeah, I think it's quite healthy.
mm. Yeah, like you were mentioning earlier that you were interested in, I think, in the philosophy of science, or right? And so this is also of course, there will be things that are repeated and will get, kind of maybe stuck in different areas. But I like this. I like this description of a spiral, right? Well, we can't forget what we've done previously, but as long as we're moving into new territory, we'll be
Exactly.
making progress. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I have a final question for you. You're now retired. And well, first of all, you've been retired from the German system, which, and now from the University of Manchester as well. So, um, I'm still an early career researcher. The idea of retirement is very far away. Um, so I'm curious, how do you spend time at this stage? What has changed for you? Hopefully, mostly for the better.
Well, yeah, I never thought I'd retire either. It's a funny old feeling. They say academics never retire, and there's some truth in that.
Mm.
But well, first of all, I don't have to go to any administrative meetings. I
Uh,
mean, I didn't have that problem so much in Leipzig, but at the University of Manchester, I mean, the British system has been cutting and cutting and
mm,
cutting resources. And so the endless meetings where you discuss, more cuts, more cuts, more cuts.
mhm,
How to assess people on kind of uh, mathematical formulae, that sort of thing. I am so glad to be out of it. And then, as far as undergraduate teaching is concerned, I liked the teaching, but grading,
mm,
marking is a and I'm really glad to be out of that. So those are the two things I miss. I miss, I mean, partly COVID helped with this because we
mm.
weren't all together anyway. We
Yeah.
were working online all the time. And I do go in now to Lucid seminars and still work with some people. I'm still reviewing papers and grants. I'm doing quite a lot of that sort of work for the British Academy. Um, so I haven't completely retired from the field in at all. Uh, but I think I'm doing more of what I like. I'm fussier about refusing to do things I don't like.
Mm,
You still have as a senior academic, you still have a real responsibility, not
mm,
only to your own postdocs and PhD students and colleagues to write references and to
mhm,
review, but also to the field. I
mm,
mean, you can't just sort of, well, you could, but I would never cut off completely. I just try and control life a bit better. As far as my own personal, I mean, I now am really concentrated on I mean, I've always been learning the piano, but I can spend a bit more time on it now. I'm getting much more fluent in French, going to the Alliance Française in classes.
mm.
And the garden, I'm trying to get our garden into shape, which
Oh,
is great fun, but also, I'm trying to make a map of the garden so that I know what comes up when, because until now I've just thought, oh, I wonder what that is. Where did that come from? So I'm trying to sort of work through it. Now spring, so we've just
mm.
got some crops, and I'm going to really try and work out what's there and when it comes.
Oh, wonderful. I just
Maybe
wanted
it's
to.
a scientific study of the garden.
Well, it's also developing plants, correct? Um, so I just think it's funny that the reviews continue. So it popped into my head this saying, two things are inevitable in life, death and taxes, but maybe also for academics, reviews could be added to that as well. But
Absolutely.
I can really respect your feeling of continuing to contribute to the field. I mean, achieving the level of career that you achieved, the wealth of knowledge that you have, and then still wanting to share that. I think that's something that I can really respect. And I have a garden tip. So I also am a gardener, and last year I started having a journal so that I could know. And it's full of plans and what did I plant and when am I supposed to look at it or cut it or do something. I'm a pumpkin grower. So as an
Wow,
American, I'm very interested in having pumpkins to carve at Halloween, and now I'm getting more into the different kinds of pumpkins you can eat. So if you don't have
terrific.
pumpkins yet, I can highly recommend. They're very, very rewarding.
But I don't grow pumpkins because I don't really have a vegetable garden. But
Oh,
we have a wonderful organic shop down the road, and they have every different kind of squash and pumpkin. So
mm,
I cook a lot of pumpkin.
oh,
Um,
wonderful.
they gave me this wonderful tip, which is you don't have to peel them. You can
Yeah.
eat them with the skin on. I didn't know that.
Yes. Yeah, we just had baked Hokkaido last weekend. It's lovely. I love it. I did not grow up eating pumpkins. We just carved them, but now I've been very introduced.
Great.
Well, that was our little interview about growing pumpkins and things in our gardens, maybe a little bit about IASCL and a big heaping of child language research. Elena, thank you so much for joining me. It was a delight to get to know you a little bit more. I wish you all the best in your garden and other endeavors in the future, and maybe see you at the next IASCL Congress.
I hope so. And thanks very much, Katie. It was good fun, this interview. Thank you.
Thank you.